Picture a morning in the year 430 BC. The sun has not yet cleared the rooftops of Athens, and somewhere in a narrow street, smelling of wood smoke and donkey dung, a 7-year-old boy is being shaken awake by a man who is not his father. The man is a slave. He will walk this boy through the city today and every day for years to come. He will not teach him a single letter. He will not speak to him as an equal. And yet, this nameless man will shape that boy's character more than almost anyone else in his life. Who was he? Why did an entire civilization build itself around handing its children to strangers? And what was happening on that same morning behind the walls of the house where a 7-year-old girl was waking up too, in a world that would never let her step outside it? This is the story of childhood in ancient Greece, and it is far stranger, far harder, and far more human than anything you have been told. We think we know childhood. We assume it is universal, a soft, protected season of life that belongs to every human being in every era, the way the sky belongs to anyone who looks up at it. But childhood, as we picture it today, is a surprisingly recent invention. For most of human history, a child was not a delicate thing to be nurtured purely for its own sake. A child was a future soldier, a future wife, a future citizen. And in ancient Greece, that future began being decided before a child had even taken its first breath of free air. Because in ancient Greece, a child's life did not simply begin at birth, it began with a decision. Picture a small house in Athens, the air thick with oil lamp smoke. A woman has just given birth, and the midwife wraps the newborn and eventually places it before the father. It is the father, and only the father, who decides whether this child will be raised in his household at all. If he lifts the baby into his arms and presents it formally to the family hearth, the child is accepted. It will be fed. It will be named. It will belong. But if he turns away, the infant can be left exposed at a crossroads, a temple step, a rubbish heap outside the city walls, with no name and no story. This practice is called exposure, and the Greeks did not whisper about it. It was not a shameful secret hidden in the dark. It was simply how a fragile world made room for itself. Families weighed the mouths they could feed against the resources they had. A sickly infant, a child born with a visible disability, and, heartbreakingly often, a daughter when the family already had enough daughters, could be turned away. We cannot put an exact number on how often this happened. The evidence survives in scattered places, comic plays built around abandoned children later reunited with their families, philosophical writings that discuss exposure almost matter-of-factly as a tool of population control. Both Plato and Aristotle, in describing their ideal societies, simply assumed the practice would continue. Somewhere underneath the marble columns and the philosophy we still quote today, there was this colder arithmetic running through everyday life. Being born did not guarantee being kept. And if a child was accepted, if the father lifted that baby and claimed it as his own, the rituals of belonging began almost immediately. On the 5th or 7th day after birth, the household gathered for a ceremony called the amphidramia. Someone, often the midwife, would carry the naked infant in a running circle around the hearth fire, while family and friends arrived bearing small gifts, octopus, cuttlefish, sweets, turning what we might imagine as a quiet, private moment into something closer to a small, noisy festival inside one room. This was the moment the child stopped being a stranger to the household gods. 10 days later came the naming ceremony, when the baby finally received the name it would carry for life,
very often the name of a grandfather, threading the child into a chain of ancestors it would never meet. So picture it, a child's earliest days on Earth were not soft and hidden the way we imagine newborn life today. They were loud, ritualized, watched by an audience. In ancient Greece, belonging was not assumed, it was performed, witnessed, and formally given. And the moment a child survived infancy, an invisible line was drawn straight through their future. That line was gender, and it would decide nearly everything that followed: where they slept, what they learned, who they would become, and how much of the outside world they would ever be allowed to see. Let's follow a boy first, because his world is the one history preserved most clearly, written down by men who valued what other men did. For his first 7 or 8 years, a Greek boy's universe was small and domestic, not unlike any small child's world today. He played in the courtyard of the family home. He had toys, and the toys themselves feel almost startlingly familiar 25 centuries across. Archaeologists have pulled spinning tops carved from wood and terracotta out of the soil of Athens and Corinth. They have found tiny clay horses on wheels, rattles shaped like birds, and miniature furniture sized for a child's hands. One of the haunting finds is the simplest: the astragaloi, the knuckle bones of sheep and goats, worn smooth from centuries of small fingers. Children tossed them, caught them, stacked them, gambled with them, the direct ancestor of the dice and jacks children still play today. Greek pottery shows children spinning a top called a strombos with a small whip, rolling a metal hoop called a trachos down a street with a stick, and playing games that sound almost like nursery rhymes when translated. Statues, where you froze in place. Blind man's bluff, where one child stumbled blindfolded towards the laughter of the others. Some of these games have never really left us. They simply changed their names and crossed 2,500 years to reach a modern playground. But somewhere around the boy's 7th birthday, that small, soft world ended. A new figure entered his life and would not leave it for years: the pedagogue. The word pedagogue survives in our language today as a near synonym for teacher, but the original pedagogos was not a teacher at all. He was a slave, usually an older, trusted household slave, sometimes a man who had been captured in war or purchased in a foreign market, and his job had nothing to do with academic instruction. His job was to walk beside the boy every single day, to the schoolhouse and back, to carry his students' writing tools and lyre, to watch him in the street, to discipline him if he misbehaved, to shield him from the dangers and temptations of the open city. Picture the scene as it would have looked on any ordinary morning in Athens: a narrow, dusty street, voices calling out from open doorways, the smell of bread and fish from the market stalls, and moving through it, a boy of 7 or 8 walking just slightly behind a grown man who is legally his property's equivalent, and yet in practice something closer to a constant shadow, half guardian, half jailer. Athenian law required this. Children were not permitted to wander the streets unsupervised, and the pedagogue's constant presence was the city's quiet acknowledgement that the world outside the home held real danger for the young.
There's something almost unbearably poignant buried in this arrangement. Many pedagogues, despite their enslaved status, were highly educated men, sometimes more educated than the free citizens who owned them. Some had been teachers or scholars before war or misfortune stripped them of their freedom, and here they were, forbidden by their status from ever participating in the civic life of the city they walked through every day, devoting years of quiet, unrewarded attention to shaping the character of a child who would grow up to enjoy every right denied to the man who raised him. We do not know most of their names. We know only that they existed in the thousands, woven invisibly into the backdrop of nearly every wealthy Greek boy's memory of growing up. The man who was always just one step behind him, and who, in his own way, never really left. So where exactly was this pedagogue walking the boy to? In Athens, education was not free and it was not centralized. There was no single building called school. Instead, a boy's day was assembled out of separate visits to separate teachers, each specializing in one piece of what a Greek citizen was expected to become. The first stop was usually the grammatist, the letter teacher. Here, in a modest room, boys sat with wax-coated wooden tablets and a sharp stylus, scratching out the Greek alphabet letter by letter, the same way a child today might trace letters in a workbook, except every mistake meant smoothing the wax flat and starting again. Once the alphabet was mastered, the real heart of Athenian education began, the memorization of poetry. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, the verses of Hesiod. Boys were expected not merely to read these epics, but to know them, to carry entire passages in their memory, the way we might carry a favorite song. This was not viewed as a literary luxury, it was identity itself. A grown man who could not quote Homer at a dinner party was, in the eyes of his peers, barely a man at all. The second stop was the kitharist, the music teacher, who instructed boys in playing the kithara, a stringed instrument related to the lyre, and in singing the lyric poetry that accompanied it. Music was not considered separate from intellectual life in Greece. The philosopher Plato argued that musical training shaped the soul itself, that the wrong kind of music could corrupt a young mind as surely as the wrong kind of company. And the third stop, perhaps the most physically demanding, was the palestra, the wrestling ground, where the Paido tribes drilled boys in wrestling, running, javelin, and discus throwing, the foundations of athletic competition that one day, for the most gifted among them, would lead to the Olympic Games. Here, in open courtyards under the Mediterranean sun, boys trained their bodies with the same seriousness their fathers expected them to train their minds. The Greek ideal was not a brilliant mind in a neglected body, or a powerful body with an empty mind. It was both, fused into one. They called it kalos kagathos, beautiful and good, the complete citizen. A wealthy family might afford all three forms of training for their son. A poorer family might afford only the letter teacher, or none at all. And so a child's education in Athens was never a single fixed system. It was a mirror of his family's wealth, stitched together one tutor, one lesson, one fee at a time. But across the southern horizon, in a city that prided itself on rejecting nearly everything Athens valued, a Greek boy's 7th birthday meant something almost unrecognizably different. And to understand it, we have to travel to Sparta. Here is where the story turns dark, and where we have to be very careful with the truth, because this is exactly the point where legend and history blur together most dangerously. You may have heard the famous claim that Spartan elders examined every newborn boy, and any infant judged weak or deformed was thrown from a cliff on Mount Taygetus to die. It is a vivid, horrifying image, and it appears in countless documentaries, films, and books. But here is what the actual historical record shows. The story comes almost entirely from a single ancient writer, Plutarch, who wrote the custom in his biography of the legendary Spartan lawgiver Lycurgus, written roughly 600 years after the events it claims to describe. Plutarch himself was working from older traditions and semi-legendary material, not eyewitness accounts. And modern archaeologists who have excavated the site traditionally identified as the Apothete, the chasm at the foot of Taygetus, have found something striking. Skeletal remains of adult men, consistent with the execution of criminals or enemies,
but no evidence whatsoever of infant remains. Many historians today believe the story, as dramatic as it is, may have been exaggerated or even invented long after Sparta's golden age, shaped by outsiders who wanted to paint Spartan society as the ultimate extreme of ruthless discipline. But what we can say with much greater confidence is this: Spartan infants were examined by tribal elders shortly after birth, and the decision to raise a child was not left to the father alone, the way it was in Athens. It was at least in part a matter of the community and the state. That alone tells us something extraordinary about Sparta. Even a newborn's life was not private. It belonged, in some sense, to the city before it belonged to the family. And for the boys who were raised, the state's grip only tightened with every passing year. At age 7, a Spartan boy's life changed in a way an Athenian boy's never did. He did not simply gain a pedagogue who escorted him through the streets. He was taken from his home entirely and placed into the Agoge, the Spartan infamous state-run upbringing system, to live, eat, and train alongside other boys his age under the supervision of an official called the pedagogues, the boy herder. Picture it: a child barely old enough to tie his own sandals walked away from his mother's hands into a communal barracks, organized into a herd of boys the same age, none of whom he chose, all of whom he would now live beside for years. Clothing was deliberately minimal. Food was deliberately insufficient, not from cruelty for its own sake, but by calculated design, because hungry boys were encouraged to steal food to supplement their rations, and if they were caught, they were punished not for stealing, but for failing to steal well enough. Think about what that single rule was actually teaching: that getting caught was the only true failure, that cunning mattered as much as strength, that the world would not hand you what you needed, you had to be clever enough or hard enough to take it. As the boys grew older, the training intensified. By age 12, clothing was reduced to little more than a single red cloak, worn through every season, including winter. Boys slept outdoors on beds they wove themselves from reeds gathered along the riverbanks. No blankets, no walls, just their own resourcefulness standing between them and the cold Laconian nights. They trained daily in wrestling, running, and swimming, walked barefoot deliberately to toughen the soles of their feet, and at the festival of Artemis or Thea, they were ritually whipped before the goddess's altar, and the boy who endured the longest without crying out was honored as the winner. Pain was not something to avoid in Spartan childhood. It was something to be measured, endured, and ultimately worn like an achievement.
This was not warmth replaced by cruelty for entertainment's sake. This was a society that had built, with total deliberateness, an entire childhood engineered to produce one outcome: a soldier who would never break the phalanx line, who would never run, who valued the city above his own body and his own family. By the time these boys reached their late teens, the most capable among them were selected for something called the crypteia, sent into the countryside armed with nothing but a short blade and a cloak, ordered to survive alone by hiding during the day and moving only at night. Ancient sources describe their grim purpose, identifying and suppressing members of the Helot population, the enslaved laborers who vastly outnumbered Spartan citizens and whose potential for rebellion was Sparta's deepest, most constant fear. It is worth pausing here, because this is the emotional center of the entire Spartan story. Every cruelty in the Agoge, every cold night on a reed bed, every whip mark at the altar of Artemis traces back to fear. The fear of a small ruling class permanently outnumbered by the people it had conquered and enslaved. Spartan childhood was not designed by men who hated children. It was designed by a society terrified of its own fragility, and it chose to manufacture toughness in its sons because it could not afford to raise anything softer. But what about Spartan daughters? Because here, Astonishingly, Sparta breaks almost every rule we have just described for the rest of Greece. In Athens, a girl's education stopped almost before it began. Outside of Athens, Greek girls did not attend school in any organized sense. Their training happened entirely inside the home, under the supervision of their mothers, and it focused on the skills that would define their entire adult lives: spinning wool, weaving cloth, managing a household, learning the religious duties a wife would one day be expected to perform. Some girls from wealthier families learned to read and do basic arithmetic, enough to manage household accounts. But formal academic education, poetry, music theory, the long memorization that defined a boy's schooling was almost entirely closed to them. The house itself reflected this. Wealthy Athenian homes contained a separate section called the gynoeceum, the women's quarters, often located at the rear of the house or on an upper floor, away from the street-facing rooms where men received guests and conducted business. A girl might grow from infancy to the edge of marriage largely within these walls, her view of the wider city limited to glimpses through a doorway, the sounds of the street filtering in from outside, a world she was not permitted to walk through freely. And yet, even within this restriction, Athenian religious life carved out one extraordinary exception, and it is one of the most moving details in this entire story. At the sanctuary of Artemis at Brauron, a coastal site not far from Athens, young Athenian girls, somewhere between the ages of 5 and 10, took part in a ritual called the Arctea. For a period of time, these girls left their homes and lived at the sanctuary, where they were called Arctoi, little bears. Dressed in saffron-colored robes, they ran races, danced, and performed rituals believed to honor Artemis in her ancient connection to bears and the wilderness. Ancient sources describe their grim purpose, identifying and suppressing members of the Helot population, the enslaved laborers who vastly outnumbered Spartan citizens and whose potential for rebellion was Sparta's deepest, most constant fear. It is worth pausing here because this is the strange, almost unbelievable truth sitting at the heart of this entire civilization. In the city most famous for brutal discipline and the suppression of the individual, girls were given more physical freedom than almost anywhere else in the Greek world. And in Athens, the birthplace of democracy, philosophy, theater, and nearly everything we now associate with the dawn of Western civilization, a girl's entire world might never extend beyond the walls of her own house until the day she was married. And that day, the wedding day, was, for most Greek girls, the true end of childhood, arriving startlingly early by any modern measure. Marriage for Athenian girls typically took place in their early to mid-teens, often to a husband considerably older, frequently a man in his late 20s or 30s, whom she may have barely known before the ceremony. The night before her wedding, a girl performed a ritual that captures more powerfully than almost any other Greek custom exactly what was being asked of her. She bathed in water carried from a sacred spring, poured from a special vessel called a lutrophorus, and then she gathered up the physical objects of her childhood, her toys, a lock of her hair, and offered them to the goddess Artemis. Sit with that image for a moment.
A girl, likely no older than 14 or 15, packing away her dolls and her childhood the way an adult might pack away the belongings of someone who has died, because in a very real sense, the child she had been was about to disappear. Tomorrow she would walk into a new household, under a new authority, with a new identity as a wife. Today, for the last time, she was still simply a daughter, holding the small clay toys that had filled her quiet hours inside the gynoeceum and laying them forever at the feet of a goddess. For boys, the marker of adulthood looked entirely different, though it carried its own quiet weight. Around the age of 16, an Athenian boy went through a civic ritual called the opatoria, where he was formally registered into his father's phratry, an ancient kinship group,
officially recognized for the first time as a citizen in training, no longer merely a household child, but a future participant in the laws, the assembly, and the army of his city. From here, many boys advanced into the ephebia, a period of structured military training that later centuries prepared 18 and 19-year-olds for full citizenship and the responsibility of defending the city that had raised them. Two children, born in the same decade, in the same culture, worshiping the same gods, and arriving at adulthood through ceremonies that could not have looked more different. One handed his toys to no one. He simply graduated into citizenship, assembly, and eventually command. The other handed her toys to a goddess and walked into a marriage that would, in many cases, define every remaining year of her life. So why does any of this matter now, 25 centuries later, in a world of smartphones and satellites and lives that share almost nothing on the surface with ancient Athens or Sparta? Because underneath all the differences, wax tablets instead of paper, wool tunics instead of fabric we manufacture by machine, the gods instead of the explanations modern science gives us, there is something in this story that has never actually changed. Every society, in every era, makes silent decisions about what a child is for. Ancient Greece simply made those decisions more visibly, more ritually, more nakedly than most cultures dare to do today. A father deciding whether to lift a newborn from the ground, a pedagogue walking one step behind a child for a decade of his life, shaping a soul he would never be legally permitted to call his equal. A girl laying her toys at the feet of a goddess the night before she became, in the eyes of the law, someone else's wife. A boy sleeping on a bed of reeds he wove himself, learning before he was a teenager that the only true failure in life was being caught. These were not lesser versions of childhood, waiting to evolve into something more humane. They were the logical, coherent answer a fragile, ancient world gave to a question every civilization has had to answer in its own way. How do you turn a helpless infant into the kind of adult your society actually needs to survive? Athens answered with poetry, wrestling, and the careful cultivation of citizens who could debate in the assembly and fight in the phalanx when called. Sparta answered with hunger, cold, and discipline because it believed with total conviction that softness was a luxury it could not afford. Neither answer was simple, neither answer was kind by the standards we hold today, but both were, in their own unflinching way, entirely human. And perhaps that is the real reveal hiding inside this story. Not some shocking secret fact, but a quieter, harder truth, that the children of ancient Greece were not so different from children everywhere, in any era, including our own. They played with toys their parents recognized and approved of. They feared punishment. They loved their families, even families bound by customs we might find almost unbearable to imagine. They grew up inside the only world they had ever known, and like every child in every century since, they simply assumed, because no one told them otherwise, that this was simply what childhood was. Somewhere in Athens, a pedagogue is waiting by a doorway for a boy who has just finished his lesson on Homer. Somewhere in Sparta, a girl is finishing a foot race in the open sun, her legs aching, proud. Somewhere at Brauron, a small group of girls dressed like little bears are dancing around a fire at dusk, briefly, gloriously wild, before they return to lives that will close quietly around them like a door. And somewhere in a house we will never see, in a city whose name did not survive, a father is looking down on a newborn child, deciding in a single unrecorded moment the whole shape of a life that has not yet begun. That is what ancient Greek children did all day. They lived inside the answer their civilization had already chosen for them long before they were ever born to ask the question themselves.